The Hittites were an ancient Anatolian people who established an empire at Hattusa in north-central Anatolia around 1600 BC. This empire reached its height during the mid-14th century BC under Suppiluliuma I, when it encompassed an area that included most of Asia Minor as well as parts of the northern Levant and Upper Mesopotamia. After c. 1180 BC, the empire came to an end during the Bronze Age collapse, splintering into several independent Neo-Hittite city-states, some of which survived until the 8th century BC. The Hittite language was a member of the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European language family. They referred to their native land as Hatti. The conventional name Hittites is due to their initial identification with the Biblical Hittites in 19th century archaeology. Despite the use of Hatti for their core territory, the Hittites should be distinguished from the Hattians, an earlier people who inhabited the same region and spoke a language possibly in the Northwest Caucasian languages group known as Hattic. The Hittite military made successful use of chariots. Although belonging to the Bronze Age, they were the forerunners of the Iron Age, developing the manufacture of iron artifacts from as early as the 14th century BC, when letters to foreign rulers reveal the latter's demand for iron goods. After 1180 BC, amid general turmoil in the Levant associated with the sudden arrival of the Sea Peoples, the kingdom disintegrated into several independent Neo-Hittite city-states, some of which survived until as late as the 8th century BC. The history of the Hittite civilization is known mostly from cuneiform texts found in the area of their kingdom, and from diplomatic and commercial correspondence found in various archives in Egypt and the Middle East. Archaeological discovery. The Hittites used Mesopotamian cuneiform letters. Archaeological expeditions to Hattusa have discovered entire sets of royal archives in cuneiform tablets, written either in the Semitic Mesopotamian Akkadian language of Assyria and Babylonia, the diplomatic language of the time, or in the various dialects of the Hittite Confederation. Before the discoveries, the only source of information about Hittites had been the Old Testament. Francis William Newman expressed the critical view, common in the early 19th century, that, if the Hittites existed at all, no Hittite king could have compared in power to the king of Judah. As archaeological discoveries revealed the scale of the Hittite kingdom in the second half of the 19th century, Archibald Henry Sayce postulated, rather than to be compared to Judah, the Anatolian civilization was worthy of comparison to the divided kingdom of Egypt, and was infinitely more powerful than that of Judah. Sayce and other scholars also mentioned that Judah and the Hittites were never enemies in the Hebrew texts. In the Book of Kings, they supplied the Israelites with cedar, chariots, and horses, as well as being a friend and ally to Abraham in the Book of Genesis. The first archaeological evidence for the Hittites appeared in tablets found at the Assyrian colony of Kar 1/4 LTEPE, containing records of trade between Assyrian merchants and a certain land of Hatti. Some names in the tablets were neither Hattic nor Assyrian, but clearly Indo-European. The script on a monument at Boni-Azka paragraph Y by a people of Hattusas discovered by William Wright in 1884 was found to match peculiar hieroglyphic scripts from Aleppo and Hamath in northern Syria. In 1887, excavations at Tel El Amarna in Egypt uncovered the diplomatic correspondence of Pharaoh Amenhotep III and his son Akhenaten. Two of the letters from a kingdom of Kheta apparently located in the same general region as the Mesopotamian references to land of Hatti were written in standard Akkadian cuneiform script, but in an unknown language. Although scholars could read it, no one could understand it. Shortly after this, Archibald Sayce proposed that Hatti or Koti in Anatolia was identical with the kingdom of Kheta mentioned in these Egyptian texts, as well as with the Biblical Hittites. Others, such as Max Ma 1/4 Lair, agreed that Koti was probably Kheta, but proposed connecting it with biblical Kittim, rather than with the children of Heth. Sayce's identification came to be widely accepted over the course of the early 20th century. And the name Hittite has become attached to the civilization uncovered at Boni-Azka paragraph Y. During sporadic excavations at Boni-Azka paragraph Y that began in 1906, the archaeologist Hugo Winkler found a royal archive with 10,000 tablets, inscribed in cuneiform Akkadian and the same unknown language as the Egyptian letters from Kheta, thus confirming the identity of the two names. He also proved that the ruins at Boni Azka paragraph Y were the remains of the capital of an empire that, at one point, controlled northern Syria. Under the direction of the German Archaeological Institute, excavations at Hattusa have been underway since 1907, with interruptions during both wars. Car 1/4 LTEPE was successfully excavated by Professor Tarsana ZGA 1/4 section from 1948 until his death in 2005. Smaller-scale excavations have also been carried out in the immediate surroundings of Hattusa, including the rock sanctuary of Yazza ±La Kaya, which contains numerous rock-cut reliefs portraying the Hittite rulers and the gods of the Hittite pantheon. Museums. The Museum of Anatolian Civilizations in Ankara, Turkey houses the richest collection of Hittite and Anatolian artifacts. Geography. The Hittite kingdom was centered on the land surrounding Hattusa and Nea, known as the land Hatti. After Hattusa was made capital, the area encompassed by the bend of the Halis River was considered the core of the empire, and some Hittite laws make a distinction between this side of the river, and that side of the river. For example, the reward for the capture of an eloped slave after he managed to flee beyond the Halis is higher than that for a slave caught before he could reach the river. To the west and south of the core territory lay the region known as Lui I in the earliest Hittite texts. This terminology was replaced by the names Ardzor and Kizuotna with the rise of those kingdoms. Nevertheless, the Hittites continued to refer to the language that originated in these areas as Luan. Prior to the rise of Kizuotna, the heart of that territory in Cilicia was first referred to by the Hittites as Adana. Upon its revolt from the Hittites during the reign of Amuna, it assumed the name of Kizuotna and successfully expanded northward to encompass the lower Anti-Taurus mountains as well. To the north, lived the mountainous people called the Kaskians. To the southeast of the Hittites lay the Hurrian Empire of Mitanni. At its peak, during the reign of Mursilite II, the Hittite Empire stretched from Arzor in the west to Mitanni in the east, many of the Kaskian territories to the north including Hyasa Azi in the far northeast, and on south into Canaan approximately as far as the southern border of Lebanon, incorporating all of these territories within its domain. History, background. Around 5000 BC, the region centered in Hattusa, that would later become the core of the Hittite kingdom, was inhabited by people with a distinct culture who spoke a non-Indo-European language. The name Hattic is used by Anatolianists to distinguish this language from the Indo-European Hittite language that appeared on the scene at the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC and became the administrative language of the Hittite kingdom over the next 6 or 7 centuries. The early Hittites, whose prior whereabouts are unknown, borrowed heavily from the pre-existing Hattian and Hurrian cultures, and also from that of the Assyrian colonist Circe in particular, the cuneiform writing and the use of cylindrical seals. Since Hattic continued to be used in the Hittite kingdom for religious purposes, and there is substantial continuity between the two cultures, it is not known whether the Hattics Bakursa the Hattiansa were displaced by the speakers of Hittite, were absorbed by them, or just adopted their language. Origins. It is generally assumed that the Hittites came into Anatolia sometime before 2000 BC. While their earlier location is disputed, there has been strong evidence for more than a century that the home of the Indo-Europeans in the 4th and 3rd millennia was in the Pontic steppe, present-day Ukraine around the Sea of Azov. This is known as the Kurgan hypothesis. The arrival of the Hittites in Anatolia in prehistoric times was one of a superstrate imposing itself on a native culture either by means of conquest or by gradual assimilation. In archaeological terms, relationships of the Hittites to the Azera culture of the Balkans and Maghreb culture of the Caucasus have been considered within the migration framework. The Indo-European element at least establishes Hittite culture as intrusive to Anatolia in scholarly mainstream. The Hittites and other members of the Anatolian family then came from the north, possibly along the Caspian Sea. Their movement into the region may have set off a Near East mass migration sometime around 1900 BC. The dominant inhabitants in central Anatolia at the time were Hurrians and Hattians who spoke non-Indo-European languages. There were also Assyrian colonies in the country. It was from the Assyrians that the Hittites adopted the cuneiform script. It took some time before the Hittites established themselves, as is clear from some of the texts included here. For several centuries there were separate Hittite groups, usually centered on various cities. But then strong rulers with their center in Bo-Iasca paragraph Y succeeded in bringing these together and conquering large parts of central Anatolia to establish the Hittite kingdom. Early period. The early history of the Hittite kingdom is known through tablets that may first have been written in the 17th century BC, possibly in Hittite, but survived only as Akkadian copies made in the 14th and 13th centuries BC. These reveal a rivalry within two branches of the royal family up to the Middle Kingdom. A northern branch first based in Zalpa and secondarily Hattusa, and a southern branch based in Kusra and Kadesh. These are distinguishable by their names. The northerners retained Hattian names, and the southerners adopted Hittite and Luwian names. Zalpa first attacked Kadesh under Unna in 1833 BC. One set of tablets, known collectively as the Anata text, begin by telling how Pithana the king of Kusra conquered neighboring Naa. However, the real subject of these tablets is Pithana's son Anata, who continued where his father left off and conquered several northern cities, including Hattusa, which he cursed, and also Zalpua. This was likely propaganda for the southern branch of the royal family, against the northern branch who had fixed on Hattusa as capital. Another set, the Tale of Zalpa, supports Zalpa and exonerates the later Hattusa I from the charge of sacking Kadesh. Anata was succeeded by Zazu. But sometime in 1710-05, Kadesh was destroyed, taking the long-established Assyrian merchant trading system with it. A Kusran noble family survived to contest the Zalpuan/Hattusan family, though whether these were of the direct line of Anata is uncertain. Meanwhile, the lords of Zalpa lived on. Huzziya I, descendant of Ahuzziya of Zalpa, took over Hatti. His son-in-law Labanan I, a southerner, usurped the throne but made sure to adopt Huzziya's grandson Hattusa I as his own son and heir. The Old Kingdom, the founding of the Hittite kingdom, is attributed to either Labanan I or Hattusa I, who conquered the area south and north of Hattusa. Hattusa I campaigned as far as the Amorite kingdom of Yamkhad in Syria, where he attacked, but did not capture, its capital of Aleppo. His heir, Mursili I, conquered that city in a campaign conducted in 1595 BC. Also in 1595 BC, Mursili I conducted a great raid down the Euphrates River and captured Marian Babylon, ejecting the Amorite founders of the Babylonian state in the process. However, the Hittite campaigns caused internal dissension which forced a withdrawal of troops to the Hittite homelands. Throughout the remainder of the 16th century BC, the Hittite kings were held to their homelands by dynastic quarrels and warfare with the Hurrians, their neighbors to the east. Also, the campaigns into Syria and Mesopotamia may be responsible for the reintroduction of cuneiform writing into Anatolia, since the Hittite script is quite different from the script of the preceding Assyrian colony period. Mursili continued the conquests of Hattusa I. Mursili's conquests reached southern Mesopotamia and even ransacked Babylon itself in 1531 BC. Rather than incorporate Babylonia into Hittite domains, Mursili seems to have instead turned control of Babylonia over to his Kushite allies, who were to rule it for the next 4 centuries. This lengthy campaign, however, strained the resources of Hatti, and left the capital in a state of near anarchy. Mursili was assassinated shortly after his return home, and the Hittite kingdom was plunged into chaos. The Hurrians, a people living in the mountainous region along the upper Tigris and Euphrates rivers, took advantage of the situation to seize Aleppo and the surrounding areas for themselves, as well as the coastal region of Adania, renaming it Kizuotna. Following this, the Hittites entered a weak phase of obscure records, insignificant rulers, and reduced area of control. This pattern of expansion under strong kings followed by contraction under weaker ones, was to be repeated over and over again throughout the Hittite kingdom's 500-year history, making events during the waning periods difficult to reconstruct with much precision. The political instability of these years of the Old Hittite Kingdom, can be explained in part by the nature of the Hittite kingship at that time. During the Old Hittite Kingdom period prior to 1400 BC, the king of the Hittites was not viewed by the Hittite citizenry as a living god, like the pharaohs of Egypt, but rather as a first among equals. Only in the later period of the Hittite Empire, from 1400 BC until 1200 BC, did the kingship of the Hittites become more centralized and powerful. Also in earlier years the succession was not legally fixed, enabling the War of the Roses rivalries between northern and southern branches. The next monarch of any note following Mursili I was Telepinu, who won a few victories to the southwest, apparently by allying himself with one Hurrian state against another. Telepinu also attempted to secure the lines of succession. The Middle Kingdom, the last monarch of the Old Kingdom, Telepinu, reigned until about 1500 BC. Telepinu's reign marked the end of the Old Kingdom, and the beginning of the lengthy weak phase known as the Middle Kingdom. The period of the 15th century BC is largely unknown with very sparse surviving records. Part of the reason for both the weakness and the obscurity is that the Hittites were under constant attack, mainly from the Kaska, a non-Indo-European people settled along the shores of the Black Sea. The capital once again went on the move, first to Suppiluliuma and then to Samarra. There is an archive in Suppiluliuma but it has not been adequately translated to date. It segs into the Hittite Empire period proper, which dates from the reign of Suppiluliuma I from circa 1430 BC. One innovation that can be credited to these early Hittite rulers is the practice of conducting treaties and alliances with neighboring states. The Hittites were thus among the earliest known pioneers in the art of international politics and diplomacy. This is also when the Hittite religion adopted several gods and rituals from the Hurrians. The New Kingdom. With the reign of Suppiluliuma I, the Hittite kingdom re-emerges from the fog of obscurity. Hittite civilization entered the period of time called the Hittite Empire period. Many changes were afoot during this time, not the least of which was a strengthening of the kingship. Settlement of the Hittites progressed in the Empire period. However, the Hittite people tended to settle in the older lands of South Anatolia rather than the lands of the Aegean. As this settlement progressed, treaties were signed with neighboring peoples. During the Hittite Empire period the kingship became hereditary and the king took on a superhuman aura, and began to be referred to by the Hittite citizens as my son. The kings of the Empire period began acting as a high priest for the whole kingdom, making an annual tour of the Hittite holy cities, conducting festivals and supervising the upkeep of the sanctuaries. During his reign, King Suppiluliuma I, again allied with Kizuotna, then vanquished the Hurrian states of Aleppo and Mitanni, and expanded to the west at the expense of Arzura. Another weak phase followed Suppiluliuma I, and the Hittites' enemies from all directions were able to advance even to Hattusa and raze it. However, the kingdom recovered its former glory under Suppiluliuma I, who again conquered Aleppo, reduced Mitanni to tribute under his son-in-law, and defeated Carchemish, another Syrian city-state. With his own sons placed over all of these new conquests, Babylonia still in the hands of the Kassites, this left Suppiluliuma the supreme power broker in the known world, alongside Assyria and Egypt, and it was not long before Egypt was seeking an alliance by marriage of another of his sons with the widow of Tutankhamun. Unfortunately, that son was evidently murdered before reaching his destination, and this alliance was never consummated. However, Assyria began to grow in power also, with the ascension of Ashur-urblit I in 1365 BC. Ashur-urblit I attacked and defeated Matawisa the Mitanni king despite attempts by the Hittite king Suppiluliuma I, now fearful of growing Assyrian power, attempting to preserve his throne with military support. The lands of the Mitanni and Hurrians were duly appropriated by Assyria, enabling it to encroach on Hittite territory in Asia Minor, and Adad-Nirari annexed Carchemish from the control of the Hittites. After Suppiluliuma I, and a very brief reign by his eldest son, another son, Mursili II became king. Having inherited a position of strength in the east, Mursili was able to turn his attention to the west, where he attacked Arzura and a city known as Milawanda in the coastal land of Arzura. Many recent scholars have surmised that Milawanda in Arzura is likely a reference to Miletus and Achaia known to Greek history, though there is a small number who has disputed this connection. Battle of Kadesh. Hittite prosperity was mostly dependent on control of the trade routes and metal sources. Because of the importance of northern Syria to the vital routes linking the Cilician Gates with Mesopotamia, defense of this area was crucial, and was soon put to the test by Egyptian expansion under Pharaoh Ramesses II. The outcome of the battle is uncertain, though it seems that the timely arrival of Egyptian reinforcements prevented total Hittite victory. The Egyptians forced the Hittites to take refuge in the fortress of Kadesh, but their own losses prevented them from sustaining a siege. This battle took place in the 5th year of Ramesses. Downfall and demise of the kingdom. After this date, the power of both the Hittites and Egyptians began to decline yet again because of the rising power of the Assyrians. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser I had seized the opportunity to vanquish Hurriya and Mitanni, occupy their lands, and expand up to the head of the Euphrates in Anatolia and into Babylonia, Iran, Aram, while Muwatalli was preoccupied with the Egyptians. The Hittites had vainly tried to preserve the Mitanni kingdom with military support. Assyria now posed just as great a threat to Hittite trade routes as Egypt ever had. Muwatalli's son, Uri-Teshub, took the throne and ruled as king for 7 years as Mursilai III before being ousted by his uncle, Hattusa III after a brief civil war. In response to increasing Assyrian encroachments into Hittite territory, he concluded a peace and alliance with Ramesses II, presenting his daughter's hand in marriage to the pharaoh. The Treaty of Kadesh, one of the oldest completely surviving treaties in history, fixed their mutual boundaries in Canaan, and was signed in the 21st year of Ramesses. Terms of this treaty included the marriage of one of the Hittite princesses to the pharaoh Ramesses. Hattusilai's son, Tuthela IV, was the last strong Hittite king able to keep the Assyrians out of the Hittite heartland to some degree, though he lost territory to them, and was heavily defeated by Tukulti-Ninurta I of Assyria in the Battle of Nirria. He even temporarily annexed the island of Cyprus, before that too fell to Assyria. The very last king, Suppiluliuma I also managed to win some victories, including a naval battle against Al-Ashir off the coast of Cyprus. But it was too little and too late. The Assyrians, under Ashur-resh-ishi-I had by this time annexed much Hittite territory in Asia Minor and Syria, driving out the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar I in the process, who also had eyes on Hittite lands. The Sea Peoples had already begun their push down the Mediterranean coastline, starting from the Aegean, and continuing all the way to Philosia, taking Cilicia and Cyprus away from the Hittites en route and cutting off their coveted trade routes. This left the Hittite homelands vulnerable to attack from all directions, and Hattusa was burned to the ground sometime around 1180 BC following a combined onslaught from new waves of invaders, the Khazars, Phrygians and Bridges. The Hittite kingdom thus vanished from historical records. The end of the kingdom was part of the larger Bronze Age collapse. The Syro-Hittite kingdoms. By 1160 BC, the political situation in Asia Minor looked vastly different from that of only 25 years earlier. In that year, the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser I was defeating the Mishka who had been attempting to press into Assyrian colonies in southern Anatolia from the Anatolian highlands, and the Gaska people, the Hittites' old enemies from the northern hill country between Hatti and the Black Sea, seemed to have joined them soon after. The Phrygians had apparently overrun Cappadocia from the west, with recently discovered epigraphic evidence confirming their origins as the Balkan Bridges tribe, forced out by the Macedonians. Although the Hittite kingdom disappeared from Anatolia at this point, there emerged a number of so-called Neo-Hittite kingdoms in Anatolia and northern Syria. They were the successors of the Hittite kingdom. The most notable Syrian Neo-Hittite kingdoms were those at Carchemish and Milid. These Neo-Hittite kingdoms gradually fell under the control of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Carchemish and Milid were made vassals of Assyria under Shalmaneser III, and fully incorporated into Assyria during the reign of Sargon II. A large and powerful state known as Tabal occupied much of southern Anatolia. Known as GK. I to the first I squared I plus or minus I 1/2 I Tiberno I, lat. Tibarani, Thobals and Josephus, their language may have been Luan, testified to by monuments written using Luan hieroglyphics. This state too was conquered and incorporated into the vast Assyrian Empire. Ultimately, both Luwian hieroglyphs and cuneiform were rendered obsolete by an innovation, the alphabet, which seems to have entered Anatolia simultaneously from the Aegean, and from the Phoenicians and neighboring peoples in Syria. Government. The head of the Hittite state was the king, followed by the heir apparent. However, some officials exercised independent authority over various branches of the government. One of the most important of these posts in the Hittite society was that of the Galmecide. It was superseded by the rank of the Galgestan, who, like the Galmecide, was generally a member of the royal family. The kingdom's bureaucracy was headed by the Galdubza, whose authority didn't extend over the Lugal-Dubza, the king's personal scribe. Language. The Hittite language is recorded fragmentarily from about the 19th century BC. It remained in use until about 1100 BC. Hittite is the best attested member of the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European language family. The language of the Hattusa tablets was eventually deciphered by a Czech linguist, Beda, and registered trademark Akaza 1/2, who, on November 24, 1915, announced his results in a lecture at the Near Eastern Society of Berlin. His book about the discovery was printed in Leipzig in 1917, under the title The Language of the Hittites. Its structure and its membership in the Indo-European linguistic family. The preface of the book begins with, "The present work undertakes to establish the nature and structure of the hitherto mysterious language of the Hittites, and to decipher this language. It will be shown that Hittite is in the main an Indo-European language. Due to its marked differences in its structure and phonology, some early philologists, most notably Warren Cowgill, even argued that it should be classified as a sister language to Indo-European languages, rather than a daughter language." By the end of the Hittite Empire, the Hittite language had become a written language of administration and diplomatic correspondence. The population of most of the Hittite Empire by this time spoke Luwian dialects, another Indo-European language of the Anatolian family that had originated to the west of the Hittite region. Religion and mythology. Hittite religion and mythology were heavily influenced by their Hattic, Mesopotamian, and Hurrian counterparts. In earlier times, Indo-European elements may still be clearly discerned. Storm gods were prominent in the Hittite pantheon. Tahund was referred to as the conqueror, the king of Kumir, king of heaven, lord of the land of Hatti. He was chief among the gods and his symbol is the bull. As Teshub he was depicted as a bearded man astride two mountains and bearing a club. He was the god of battle and victory, especially when the conflict involved a foreign power. Teshub was also known for his conflict with the serpent Ilionka. Biblical Hittites. The Hebrew Bible refers to Hittites in several passages, ranging from Genesis to the post-exilic Ezra and Nehemiah. Genesis 10 links them to an eponymous ancestor Heth, a descendant of Ham through his son Canaan. The Hittites are thereby counted among the Canaanites. The Hittites are usually depicted as a people living among the Israelites. Abraham purchases the patriarchal burial plot of Machpelah from Ephron Hashiti, Ephron the Hittite. And Hittites serve as high military officers in David's army. In 2 Kings 7:6, however, they are a people with their own kingdoms, apparently located outside geographic Canaan, and sufficiently powerful to put a Syrian army to flight. It is a matter of considerable scholarly debate whether the biblical Hittites signified any or all of 1. The original Hattians, 2. Their Indo-European conquerors, who retain the name Hatti for central Anatolia, and are today referred to as the Hittites, or 3. A Canaanite group who may or may not have been related to either or both of the Anatolian groups, and who also may or may not be identical with the later Neo-Hittite polities. Other biblical scholars have argued that, rather than being connected with Heth, son of Canaan, the Anatolian land of Hatti was instead mentioned in Old Testament literature and Apocrypha as Kittim, a people said to be named for a son of Javan. See also: List of Hittite kings, List of artifacts significant to the Bible, short chronology timeline, references. Literature. Jacques Frié Michel Mazur, Des origines à la fin de l'ancien royaume Hittite, Les Hittites et la Histoire tome 1, Collection Kibaba, Le Matin, Paris, 2007a. Jacques Frey Michel Mazur, Les d'art copyright du Nouvel Empire Hittite, Les Hittites et la Histoire tome 2, Collection Kibaba, Le Matin, Paris, 2007a. Jacques Frey Michel Mazur, L'Apica copyright du Nouvel Empire Hittite, Les Hittites et la Histoire tome 3, Collection Kibaba, Le Matin, Paris, 2008. Jacques Frey Michel Mazur, Le d'art copyright clé et la chute de l'Empire Hittite, Les Hittites et la Histoire tome 4, Collection Kibaba, Le Matin, Paris 2010. Jacques Frey Michel Mazur, Les royaumes d'art copyright aux Hittites, Les Hittites et la Histoire tome 5, Collection Kibaba, Le Matin, Paris 2012. External links. Video lecture at Oriental Institute Euro Tracking the Frontiers of the Hittite Empire, Hattusa's Bagaska Paragraph Y, Arzawa, to the west, throws light on Hittites, pictures of Boyaska Paragraph Y, one of a group of important sites, pictures of Yazza +or-La Kaya, one of a group of important sites, Der Anata text, Tarsanozgug, Hittites.info, Hittite period in Anatolia, Hoitologia Portal Mainz, by the Academy der Wissenschaften, Mainz, corpus of texts and extensive bibliographies on all things Hittite, Hittites area in Cappadocia.